Next on Newton Newsmakers, if clear, snow-free sidewalks are such a high priority for Newton residents, why can't we figure out a way to get us there? By now, you've probably heard about the proposed ordinance that would legally require you to shovel the sidewalk adjacent to your home. So why is this entire topic of snow removal so controversial? And are there any other solutions? Joining us in the discussion, 4 Newton residents with differing viewpoints on how to deal with all of this. The topic is snow, again, and we'll see how much we can pack into the next 30 minutes. Next on Newton Newsmakers. Newton Newsmakers is made possible through the volunteer production efforts of the employees of mass media and big city publishing, and through the support of Newton residents like you. Hi everybody, welcome to Newton Newsmakers. I'm Charlie Shapiro. Just about everybody agrees that clearer sidewalks are important. It's a matter of public safety and equal access, and obviously it's safer to have our kids walking on the sidewalks and not on the streets. This is one of the most talked about topics in the city of Newton. Generally, there are 2 schools of thought. On one hand, you have folks who say that if you own a home in Newton, it's your duty to shovel out the abutting sidewalks, and since not enough people are doing it, or doing it well enough, we need to have an ordinance to require people to do it. On the other hand, we have folks who are saying since the sidewalks are like the roads owned by the city and shared by all, the city should retain its responsibility to clear the sidewalks, do a better job, and residents could certainly pitch in if they're able to. Emotions run high, but what are the facts? What's actually being proposed at this point? What are the actual ramifications of passing or not passing an ordinance? And if we don't pass one, what are the alternatives? Because obviously something has to happen here. So with us today, Newton residents who have not been shy about speaking out on the topic. First, we have Ed Prisby, who's been on the show with us before. Welcome back. Ed's a practicing attorney in Newton and among other things has written extensively on the topic of snow ordinance, including on his own blog, which can be found at prisblog.blogspot.com. Did I get that right?
Yes, you did.
All right. We're off to a good start then. Barbara John is next. Barbara is a community and political activist. She also is a program producer in her own right here at New TV. She's put together some great specials, including various political debates and profiles of our State House delegation and even the late Senator Ted Kennedy. Scott Griggs. Scott is a practicing attorney who specializes in liability issues. He's usually the guy that defends you if something is going on. His letter to the Tab on the snow shoveling topic was recently published. Scott has 3 children and your 3 kids attend Cabot. Does that sound...
That's right.
Did I get this right so far? All right. And we have my colleague on the board of Alderman Vicki Danberg. Alderman Danberg is the chair of the city's snow committee. She is also the lead sponsor of the snow ordinance proposal. And thanks, Vicki, for coming back. We were here a year ago talking about this, and you have done an amazing amount of work on this, and you should be commended for that. Very contentious topic. Why don't we start with you? Tell us, excuse me, where we were about a year ago and where we are now with what's actually being proposed, and we'll try to go through that briefly and then talk about where it is, where it's going, and what the possibilities are for alternatives if this doesn't pass for some reason.
I'd be happy to do that. A year ago, the Snow Committee was still working on getting all of the particulars together, working out the details, figuring out what the ordinance ought to say, doing research into other communities, finding out what works and what doesn't work in other communities. We finished that work, did the report in the fall. It's available on the web for anybody, through the city website for anybody to look at. Your next question was what are the provisions? The provisions that exist now, we're trying to make this ordinance simple because the simpler the ordinance itself, and then the details would be in the policy. We feel that is the way it would work the best.
If the ordinance passes, people would be required by ordinance to take a look at the sidewalk that abuts their home, go out, and regardless of how much snow has fallen, it would be the individual's, according to ordinance, legal responsibility to maintain that piece of property in the sense of not jackhammering up stuff, okay, but obviously clearing off the snow. Do it within 30 hours. If you don't do it, there would be no penalty.
That's right. In addition to that, we just added, because of a lot of commentary and I think very good comments from the public, we added a protection to elderly and disabled who cannot afford to have their sidewalks done.
So it's over the age of 60,
Right.
I believe, give or take. I might be 65, but over the age of 60. And then if you are truly low income.
Right.
And you have to qualify for both of those to
That's
receive
correct.
that type of help. Okay, so basically that kind of states where it is.
Yeah.
The differences from last year is the width is different, the amount of time from 24 to 30, give people more time.
Penalties
and the big difference is that there's no penalty.
penalties,
Because
right.
originally it was a $50 fine for the first time and maybe $75 the second, 100 for the, there were penalties that were financial penalties then.
That's
and
right.
so we've come to this point in a year.
Right.
But the basic idea is the same. People would be required to do it. So
Right.
I just want to
And
make sure
yeah,
that I've got
I think
that
it's
about
a better.
right.
I think it's a better piece of legislation now than it was a year ago.
Okay, so let's go to Scott Griggs. You're a guy who's written a letter to the tab. You have discussed your thoughts on this. By the way, we have two people here, two attorneys, so you know this will be fun. So Scott, go ahead and from a liability perspective, from a City of Newton resident perspective, what's the problem?
Well, from a resident's perspective, I'd like to see the sidewalks cleared, and I walk my children who are in the 2nd, the 3rd, the 4th grade at Cabot School every day to school, and we spend most of the walk in the street. I avoid Cabot Street because it's very busy, but we take a shortcut, walk across the field, but often, even with a crossing guard present, because of snow piled on sidewalks, I'd like to see the sidewalks cleared, and it creates the hazard of walking in the road. And sometimes the crosswalk isn't even accessible, and so that is a problem, and I'd like to see sidewalks cleared. On the other hand, to foist this responsibility from the city on to the property owner who abuts the sidewalk to then clear sidewalks that aren't even theirs, to undertake a duty that they don't already have, is to then invite liability. Once you undertake as a homeowner to shovel property or clear snow from property that's not yours, your homeowner's policy may not cover you, and you've already undertaken to change the nature of the snow that's there, and you could possibly create an even worse situation. So you are actually exposing yourself at this point in time. While it might be a very nice thing to do, and I, for one, clear my own sidewalks to the best of my ability, and even today I worked for a couple of hours unsuccessfully to clear my sidewalks because of the snow recently. But
well, let me ask you this, though. Would this ordinance passing change your behavior?
I might act differently if there were fines, and right now the way the ordinance is constructed, there are no fines attached to it. I suppose that could possibly change in the future, but as proposed right now, that's not. It would not change my behavior, but I would still advise people to make careful decisions. The reason I do it on my property is because I think that I can do a good job, and I'll do the best that I can. It's flat. I don't think that there's an inherent problem there. But previously, 3 years ago, I lived in a different side of town, still in the Cabot School District, but up West Newton Hill. And I had two sidewalks, one on the front, one on the side, on two different streets. And it was right near Newton North High School. And I found that when I worked long hours and there was nobody at home to manage the area that I'd shoveled, there would be a melt in the freeze, and it would create essentially a luge sled run, or bobsled run. And it was more dangerous than if I hadn't touched it. So there were times where I would think that based on the weather forecast or my own ability to be there and actually take care of it, to salt or to put anti-icing compounds down or something, I would often make the election that I wouldn't shovel, and it was actually safer for people, the kids in high school, to walk in the street as opposed to down the luge sled run that I'd created.
Okay, so now I'm going to do the most dangerous thing ever, and that is to ask another attorney to say what he thinks about what you just said. So, Ed, what's your thoughts on this?
From a personal perspective, from the perspective of a resident, I don't want to spend my time dodging kids walking in the street in conditions where it's hard enough to control my car as it is. That's been a problem for me. I live in West Newton. Franklin School's right down the street. I drive down Derby Street every day to go to work. And in the summertime, that street is crowded enough and dangerous enough as it is. In the wintertime, you really have to use a lot of caution, and even more than you would ordinarily think. You know, your car can go this way or that depending on which way the slush is
Well,
plowed.
but that's the argument for not having kids go in the street, which
Right.
I can't find a single person that doesn't agree with the idea.
Right, but
that
Charlie,
it's
in order
better
to do that,
have
you have to have
on the
kids. You have
streets.
to have kids be able to walk on the sidewalks.
Well,
Okay,
and again,
and
that's
part
the
of
point.
and part
Right.
of the reason why you want to live in Newton is because we have excellent schools. Part of what makes the Newton schools excellent is they are neighborhood schools. That means they are walkable schools. And this administration and this board, I think in particular, wants to see more kids being able to walk to school
So we
because
need the
busing them there is
sidewalks done.
expensive. So you need the sidewalks done.
Okay.
From a legal perspective, Massachusetts courts have continually held that violation of an ordinance to shovel or ice salt does not inure liability on the homeowner to third parties. And there was a case. I don't know if you guys remember the guy by the name of Bob Gamere. He used to be a sportscaster
Yeah,
on Channel
sure.
56. Bob Gamere in the late 1970s was walking down Commonwealth Avenue in Boston. He slipped and fell on a patch of ice and decided that he was going to sue the city of Boston as well as the owners of 234 and 236 Commonwealth Avenue as evidence of the homeowner's negligence. He cited that, well, there is this ordinance. And because these people didn't comply with the ordinance, there's some liability there. And the court held as follows. Generally, a violation of a statute or ordinance is some evidence of negligence as to all the consequences it was intended to prevent where its violation contributed to the injury. But it has been held that ordinances which require householders to remove snow and ice from sidewalks are for the benefit of the community at large and not for persons who fall as a result of snow and ice. Any obligation imposed by the ordinance runs to the municipality, not
Okay.
to the person involved.
The Gamere case that Ed just brought up is fact-specific, but it stands for the principle that the duty imposed by an ordinance runs from the homeowner to the city for the purposes of shoveling the sidewalk and the responsibility to do that task, but not to the foot traveling public at large. In other words, passerbys. It doesn't create a duty that would then be used in the standard tort analysis for negligence of duty, breach, causation, and harm. It doesn't create a new duty that you can then breach and cause harm
So
thereby.
the same duty is there. That's the same structure is there now, where if it's not private property. So that if you've heard about the Target case, Papadopoulos, I believe.
That's right.
Where it was the natural accumulation thing on your own property, whether it's business or residential, on your own property. It used to be that if it snowed, if you decided not to touch it, they couldn't sue you. I mean, they could sue you for anything, okay? But if they sued you, they probably wouldn't have a basis of winning, because if you didn't touch it, it was naturally there, you didn't disturb it, you didn't create a situation that made it worse where somebody could get hurt, and so you were off clear, basically. That got tossed out. Am I saying this roughly right, guys?
Roughly right.
Okay.
There are some differences, but you're
But-
doing fine.
but-
For a layperson, you're doing fine.
Thank you. But basically, that got tossed out. So on your own personal property, whether it's business or residential, you now no longer have the protection of the natural accumulation. You now have to take care of it in a reasonable sense,
Right.
Because it would leave you open.
Right.
Am I correct that since the sidewalks are public property, the Papadopoulos Target case does not apply to the sidewalk?
In no way that I can see.
But the Papadopoulos case just changes the nature in which you analyze liability in general for snow and ice accumulations and removal thereof, not who is responsible for doing it.
Right.
Okay, this is Route 9 here. It's a block before Parker Street. This is going east towards the city. Let's say, for example, that everybody who was a homeowner on Route 9 down that street did their sidewalk. We have a bit of a problem here, and the problem is that the dirty snow here in the bottom left and the front, that's the plow, and people still wouldn't be able to get out.
Route 9 is going to be probably the
So
most
is that a bad
important of those
example?
areas. It's not a bad example. What you're showing is the worst that that can happen. And I think that probably in an example like Route 9, the city would have to do it. We would have to add that to the list of what needs to be done.
Which is
because-
something that we could do.
Yes, I think we could do that. It's
Okay.
all a question of money and priorities. It's just money.
Okay. All right, so Barbara John, where are you on all this?
Well, I never heard Vicki say that before, but that was our property on Route 9. And my husband wants to change our address because he can't even shovel a little path out for the postman. It takes 45 minutes for a little path from our door to the postman. So we have approximately 80 feet frontage on Route 9. They said, we can't do it. We'll just have to get fined. When they were talking about fines, I thought, we're just going to get fined. That's it. We'll just have to pay these fines. It isn't easy to find people kids don't walk around Newton saying, can I shovel for you? In some communities they do. In Boston they do, as a matter of fact. In Newton, I've never seen one yet, and I've lived here over 30 years. So I figured that if the ordinance passes, we're really in serious trouble. But also, I've talked to friends of mine, and you also addressed the senior citizen problem. Well, there are seniors who may be above that income who still are house poor. And since they don't have a lot of money, they may get out and start shoveling and consequently hurt themselves, slip, fall, and you know, maybe have a heart attack, who knows what. Also, I have friends who are younger. However, they are working very hard. Like you said, you got home very late at night. They get home late, and I think it would be very hard for them to shovel. You know, this snow season is exceptionally awful.
This is about as bad as we hope it'll get.
And we hope in the future that they're 3 or 4 inches at a time, and most people could do the 3 or 4 inches, but in a season like this, it becomes really, really impossible to do. And the snow plows, not only on our corner, but the snow plows do, when there's no place for snow, they push it, and then consequently
Makes it impossible.
Yeah,
to
it's
do.
very
Yeah.
difficult.
There-
to
Yeah,
get
we actually
out.
had a
will be
bunch of
times-
pictures from other places too.
Sure.
you know.
There will be times when the city is just going to have to declare an amnesty, like in the circumstances that we've got this year. You get to a point where there's nowhere else to put it, and so the city will simply say, do the best you can.
Just
Yeah,
for purposes of discussion,
Sure.
if it is true that there's, or if the city really wants to encourage people to actually shovel their sidewalks, I don't know if it's part of this ordinance, but it would be interesting to see if it was. Would the city indemnify, defend, and hold me and my subcontractors who do my sidewalks, or my son, or the neighbor who actually clear the city sidewalks? Would they indemnify, defend, and hold me harmless in case I get sued and I have to pay $40,000 in attorney's fees to defend a lawsuit? Is the city interested in doing that for us? I'd like to hear that. I would suspect the answer is maybe not.
Is the city
Before we hear-
legally able to do that?
Before we hear from an attorney who really knows what he's doing, since I'm not an attorney, what I would like to say is that I understand in Illinois there is, and maybe it's in Chicago, there is an indemnification that you're talking about. So pretty much exactly what you've suggested. This would be something that we would have to work on the state level in order to do, because we couldn't really do it. We can't do it on the municipal level. If we could get a state level indemnification going, I would be the first one to sign on to having that done.
Well, that
In
has
the
been
meanwhile-
introduced in the Mass State House, by the way. One of the state
Yes.
reps, not from Newton, but that is a legitimate concern.
Yes.
Okay.
Well,
It's a
yes,
concern.
It's a concern.
Well, but
Lawsuits happen.
Lawsuits do happen, and there's people ask me all the time, can I be sued for this? Well, you can be sued for anything. But whether it would take $40,000 to extricate yourself from this lawsuit that's essentially baseless, I don't think so. The city can do whatever it wants in terms of protecting people from liability.
so the city could choose to do that if it wanted to.
I'm not sure. I think you have to talk to the city solicitor about that, whether or not
Okay.
the city is
right.
able to contract away the
$40,000 to trial is conservative, by the way.
What
Yeah.
are the other? Let's try to blow through a few of these real quickly.
I have a
Barbara.
couple of other concerns. You know, people look at this as kind of nirvana to get these sidewalks done. Well, I walk my dog 3 miles a day, and I don't walk on the sidewalks, because the sidewalks, and in my neighborhood, people generally do shovel their sidewalks. However, the sidewalks are so much more slippery than the streets, and especially after the first day of a storm, because, you know, the streets get a lot of traffic, they get cleared pretty much, but the sidewalks are still very icy. Then the second concern I have is the use of salt. I'm walking my dog. My dog is very sensitive to salt on the street. The salt in the street seems to wash off pretty fast. So if people put salt on the sidewalk, he puts his little foot up, and I have to pick him up and carry him along. So those are two concerns. And I can see people walking on the sidewalk thinking this is great and falling down.
I would love to take a look at some ways to solve this. So let me just ask you this. If the ordinance for some reason doesn't pass, do we have any other thoughts on how we can solve the problem?
I do. I would offer that the city should indemnify us for our efforts for snow shoveling the sidewalks that abut our houses. And if Ed is right, and these are baseless lawsuits, they may or may not be, I would differ. I'd say some of them may have some merit if we change the flow of the runoff and the ice. There's always potential for liability, but even without liability, the Papadopoulos case has reset the case law in a sense that it has opened up a lot of new theories that could now potentially be used against homeowners. So we'll wait and see, but in the meanwhile, it's going to be expensive to defend these lawsuits. If the city can indemnify us, then we'll
So that
happily
takes away
shovel.
that objection, basically.
Correct.
Does it take away the objection to the ordinance, or just takes away the objection to that aspect of it?
Well, I would say it takes away the objection to that aspect of it, and if there are no fines, then the objection disappears on those grounds, certainly.
One of the important things that we have to look at, and Ed touched on this, is the fact that we've got an $8.5 million deficit shortfall in our budget. The city, people have said, well, let the city do it. We all want the sidewalks done. Why don't you just find the money? Find the money and have the city pay the $1.8 million. 30 years ago, we might have had the ability to do this. We don't now. We're 28 years
but nobody
into
wants to
Prop
shift
2.5.
money. Very few people, I think, want to shift money from either schools or other services to do this. I don't think it's a that high priority. I think that's a safe thing to
And where would the money
say.
come from?
Well, this gets into a couple of potential solutions that I think people have spoken about. Alderman Gentile, in one of the meetings, came up with an idea of having the fines. There was an issue with fees rather, not fines, fees. If you take the 1.8 million that it would cost to do it, distribute it over 30,000 households roughly, it's about $50-75 a year, but then there's a rule where people can opt out of that, and so that creates a potential patchwork. And then there was some other discussion where if you did that, but you had that in combination with an ordinance where you structured it in such a way where it would become financially beneficial to not opt out because the fine was higher than the cost of staying in. There were some different ways of massaging that around, because basically what we're trying to do is change human behavior through an ordinance and hopefully through an education process. So there are different ways to do it, and I'm always afraid that there's a lot of folks that, I actually had somebody come up to me and point her finger in my face and basically say, if you don't vote for this ordinance, you don't care about the safety of our children. All right? Oh, well, that's ridiculous. Okay, of course everybody cares about the safety of our kids, but it gets into that level of conversation which is just poisonous to the discussion.
I have my own folder of hate mail on this, with arguments on the other side.
President Lennon had an idea too.
Let me
go ahead.
comment on what you just said,
Sure.
Charlie. The issue of charging a fee is certainly an interesting one to look into, and even if the ordinance passes, I plan to continue to look into the issue of being able to charge a fee.
I think the reason why there's so much resistance to this is for people like Barbara, people who have, this is the way that their life has been in Newton, they're happy with the way their life has been, and this is going to present to them real inconveniences, okay? But right now this is the difference to me between an inconvenience and a problem. If you have to go out and shovel the snow and you are physically unable, it's an inconvenience, you gotta call the city. But if I hit a kid walking in the street because he's going to school, that's a problem.
But doesn't that actually bode even more strongly then for the argument that the city should do it, because it's the only way we can be assured of a consistent, clear sidewalk that is having the right type of sand, the right type of salt, the right type of maintenance.
Actually, the city-done sidewalks are the ones that are the most poorly done of all. And generally what people have to do after the sidewalk plow goes down is to go out and now shovel what's already been compacted by the bobcat. So that's really not going to be a good answer to this.
Boy, that was a
Are you sure of that data?
I was going to say, that was very depressing there for a minute.
Because, you know, I walk, my route with my dog includes Walnut Street where it meets Dedham, and a bobcat goes up there. And that I find, I don't walk on many sidewalks because people with shovels, people with snow blowers, there's too much snow. And then I do wear yaks to prevent,
Yep,
you know, the
that
little
helps.
things
That
to
helps.
prevent myself from falling down. But on those particular, I think that's my experience with the bobcats. Those sidewalks happen to be quite good and nice to walk on.
It warms my heart to hear that that those sidewalks are walkable, because I have gotten a lot of comment from people who have gone out and done them and complained about them. But the city has done an additional 22 miles this year of sidewalk. Most of the people in the city have probably noticed that we are now doing all of the sidewalks that abut city property, which really, really helps.
The inside baseball, for folks that may not follow this that closely, this has to go through 3 committees: the Finance Committee, the Public Safety and Transportation Committee, and it has to go through the Public Facilities Committee. And when I say go through, it does not necessarily mean it needs to be approved by those committees. It just needs to come out of those committees and go to the full board. And the vote in Public Facilities, which takes care of the roads and all of that, was 3-3, with a couple of folks missing at the meeting. And the folks in the Public Safety, it was 3 against the ordinance, 2 in favor, and 1 abstaining, which is basically a tie in my book. And we don't know what's going to happen in the Finance Committee. And so I say that, and I think this has been a very fair discussion, really, but I hope you agree.
3 committees, and that has to go before the full board.
That would be right. It has to be discharged from the 3 committees, regardless of what the vote is in those 3 committees. Just procedurally, this is how it works.
Charlie, how does anything get done in City Hall?
Well, sometimes you wonder, but it's a pretty good city, actually. I think it works pretty well so far, and I think, like what Vicki said, I actually agree with Vicki 100% on this. Sometimes it's a good idea to let things take longer than some might like them to take, because if there is this much contentiousness about a particular subject, you know, I sure wouldn't want to be in the situation where we're passing something with a 51% margin only to revisit it to see if it goes down to 49 every year for the next 5 years.
Sometimes gridlock is good.
6 years it's been when this started. You started working on this 6 years ago?
Yeah, about that.
Yeah, that's too long.
Anyway, thank you very much to our guest. It's Scott Griggs, who's an attorney in Newton. Barbara John, who is a resident of Newton, lives down the road. Thank you for coming as well. Ed Prisby, who is also an attorney, and my colleague on the board, Alderman Vicki Danberg. Thank you all very much for coming in. All right, this program will be repeated throughout the month, as if you could possibly want to see it again, and online in its entirety at newtonnewsmakers.org. I'm Charlie Shapiro. Thanks for watching. Thanks for participating in the democratic discussion and process, and we'll see you next time for another edition of Newton Newsmakers.
That was fun.
Good.
Very good.
Newton
That one?
Newsmakers is made possible through the volunteer production efforts of the employees of mass media and big city publishing, and through the support of Newton residents like you.